Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Discovering Cincinnati's Amazing Startup Ecosystem, Part 1. This program is proudly sponsored by P&G Ventures, Kroger, First Financial, North American Properties, Vora Ventures, and Taft. Today's webinar will have a Q&A session after the presentation portion. Please continue to use the Q&A tool at the bottom of your screen to ask your questions. A recorded version of today's webinar will also be provided a few days after this event, as well as the survey that will pop up once you exit this webinar at the end. So please fill that out. It only takes a minute and it helps us out a ton. Thank you all so much for attending. I will hand it off to Eric Wiseman, Vice President of External Relations at Centrifuge, to get us started.
Great, thanks Dana, and welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to be presenting to everybody this afternoon. This is going to be a real quick kind of overview of what an entrepreneurial ecosystem is, kind of give you the backstory of Startup Cincy, this name and this brand that we've given to our neck of the woods here in Greater Cincinnati. And then we'll have time for some questions afterwards. But if you have questions as I'm giving the presentation, I'm completely comfortable answering those. So we'll try to get some interactivity here going as well. But thanks again to our sponsors to make this program possible. Really just a who's who of folks that have their shoulder against the wheel and are really helping out in the ecosystem here. So thanks to P&G Ventures, Kroger, First Financial, Vora Ventures, North American Properties, and Taft. Again, I'm Eric Weissman, Vice President of External Relations with Centrifuge. I've been with Centrifuge for 7 years. It'll be 7 years in about 2 weeks, and I'm expecting, I think they're doing the statue out front right now. I think that they've got a good spot for it, and I'll look really good out there on Vine Street. But part of the founding team, I like to say that I was here when we were making things up. We're still making things up in a good way. That's what all kind of startups do, is have that iterative nature to finding out what's working and what's not, and being able to pivot quickly. So over the course of the next few minutes, what we want to touch base on is this concept of entrepreneurial ecosystem building, which is a lot of syllables, right? That's a mouthful of words, but that's what we're doing here. That's what the mission of Centrifuge is. And I'm honored to be able to talk to the group again. I think it's next week, a little bit of a double click on what Centrifuge does and how we interact and some of the things that we do to support the ecosystem and really help foster entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial growth. But I want to cover today, why entrepreneurs? Why do we focus on entrepreneurs? What's the future look like? And those are never more important than now in this COVID era that we have, that entrepreneurs are going to be critical to helping us move forward. Also want to talk about how Greater Cincinnati is contributing to that effort. What are we doing that's special? Are we leading? Are we lagging? Are we in front? Are we behind? Is there anything that we're doing that is particularly special, or anything that we can learn from our peer cities? And those peer cities that we compare ourselves to are similar in geography. We're never going to be Boston. We're never going to be Austin, Texas. There's some special things that are built into those larger metropolitan areas, but we can hold our own against Indianapolis, against Columbus, Cleveland, those cities that are in that concentric circles around Greater Cincinnati. So what are we doing that's different, and how are we competing with them? So, first of all, and let's kind of open this up to do some questions. So if you can put this either in the chat, or let me see how I can access that, or maybe Zaina can just jump in if I don't catch these. But why would you think, so just fire some things out there. Why would a community, why would a city focus on entrepreneurs as a way for it to grow? So just fire off some top of mind things of why would you focus on entrepreneurs? Why wouldn't you try to focus on wooing a big company in here, a big manufacturer, or a customer service hub? What are some reasons that entrepreneurs would be something that we focus on? So let me see if I can go over to the chat and see what's happening. More businesses, that's right. So from a net standpoint, there's actually more entrepreneurs out there. Population growth is interesting. It does come down to jobs. At some point, it does come down to jobs, and entrepreneurs, really create jobs. So jobs is great, as well as there's one other thing that I'm hoping somebody will hit on. Top talent is good. More small businesses. Character is exactly right. But what else do specifically startups bring? Think about it from a dollar standpoint. They bring in interesting ideas that people can invest in. So think about that. Think about that, how those net new jobs, those net new companies that are being formed, people need to finance them in some way, shape, or form. And then, the final thing that I have is just from a community engagement standpoint. So these are all great ideas, but wanted to make sure that you guys were thinking through of why are we focusing on entrepreneurs. So those are all really good ideas. But now let's cover, like, who is an entrepreneur, and have you ever thought about that? Like what does the word entrepreneur mean? And so just rattle off some things of who do you think entrepreneurs are, and I'll just keep riffing on that, because one of the myths that we tried to bust here is that entrepreneur used to be a code word for can't hold a job. I'm an entrepreneur. I do a bunch of different things, but think about what that word means to you. Who are these entrepreneurs, and what types of businesses do they run? Meets an unmet demand. That's a really good one. They're always motivated. They're always trying to solve problems, always trying to look for some different way to do things that maybe haven't ever been solved, or just the niche that somebody else wants to scratch. And hopefully everybody on this, in this program, has that healthy disrespect for the status quo, right? That itch that they want to, that drive that keeps them moving forward to say, I want to try something new, and I want to follow my own way. But what I was going for here is the different types of entrepreneurs. We divide this up into really 4 main categories. You've got a Main Street entrepreneur. So a Main Street entrepreneur is somebody that, is a dry cleaner. Think of it that as a kind of a mom and pop shop. Those are what we consider Main Street entrepreneurs. And by we, I mean the industry. So these are kind of industry accepted categorizations of what an entrepreneur is. And then there's micro enterprise. These are not big cos, so they're not P&G level yet, but they're like Paycor. If you've ever heard of Paycor, they're a payroll processing company headquartered in Cincinnati, but they're global. They've gotten gobs of investment. They create a lot of talent here in the region, but they're not a big co. Right? They're not global like Kroger and Great American Insurance, but they're in that micro enterprise. So, but they're still an entrepreneur. They're still entrepreneurial led. Then you got innovation led. This is our bread and butter, really. Those startups that are looking for, to get their rocket ship started and focus on technology. There is technology, or you'll hear us say tech or tech enabled. Technology is a part of the solution. Virtually everything, if I have a website, I'm selling via e-commerce. Is that innovation? Well, it's close enough. You're using technology to really leverage your business, but that's what we're talking about there in that third categorization. And then the fourth categorization is second stage. So once you get off the ground, now you're growing, now you're scaling. So a company like Navistone, if you've heard of them, or Vendly, VNDLY, 80 Acres is another one. They're at that second stage. So they're not just, 2 people on a whiteboard. That this has gone beyond that, and now they're actually building a business. So these are all entrepreneurs. So wanted to talk about, why we're focusing on entrepreneurs and why we think from a centrifuge standpoint, and something that I'm very passionate about, is growing this ecosystem, and why are we going to foster economic development through entrepreneurs. These are the reasons why. And then who is an entrepreneur, and what are the different types of entrepreneurs, and how do we categorize that. So I want to take a little bit of a step back and introduce some language just to give you some footing from the Kauffman Foundation. The Kauffman Foundation is an organization headquartered in Kansas City, and focusing on fostering entrepreneurship and helping entrepreneurs and ecosystems and communities throughout the country, and really lowering barriers to entry on becoming an entrepreneur. So this content that I'm giving now is part of a class that I teach at Miami University on ecosystem building. I am one of very few. There are less than 3 people in the country that are teaching ecosystem building, especially from a practitioner standpoint, and I'm one of them. The Kauffman Foundation is really behind this effort, and so I just want to give some foundational stuff of why this matters and who's really paying attention. So new business creation in the United States is at a 40-year low, and now it's even lower. Now we've got to really focus on how we harness this momentum and really give people the opportunities, because they've either lost their job, maybe you're a server or a chef or restaurant owner, and now your restaurant isn't coming back. So now you've never been able to step away from your job because you're either making too much money, or you've got a successful business, and now you're like, you know what, I want to do something different. I think I want to be an entrepreneur. I think I want to start something new. So where the Kauffman Foundation came in a few years ago with the idea that despite their charge and despite the $1 billion of endowment that they have, I call it Scrooge McDuck money. They're just gobs of resources. Despite all of that, the numbers weren't changing to the positive side. It was $50,000 here, $100,000 here. We're supporting these various entities and organizations, but things were still going down. So what if they agreed that entrepreneurs need communities? Communities are really ecosystems. Ecosystems, because they're complicated, ecosystems need builders. So what if entrepreneurial ecosystem building was a thing? What if it was a practice? What if it was something that you could study? What if it was something you could be good at? What if there were best practices? And this sounds so obvious, right? Like, what if there were things you could watch that other cities were doing that other cities could learn from? What about rural entrepreneurs? What can they glean from this whole system? So I was really motivated by this when I caught wind of this at a conference that I went to. It was 3 years ago, almost exactly 3 years ago. And so reached out to my friends at Miami University and said, I want to teach a class in entrepreneurial ecosystem building, and had been feeding that back to the Kauffman Foundation. They're very interested and very motivated to continue to evangelize the importance of focusing on entrepreneurs as a way for our communities to go forward and our nation really to go forward. So that's the context. That's the setup for what we're going to talk about today, is this ecosystem that's right here in Cincinnati. But before we get to that, here are the components of an ecosystem. And so I'll just let this soak in for a little while, but these are all the facets and pieces of what makes up an ecosystem. Ecosystem is kind of a scientific word, right? It's not the most friendliest. It's a little sterile. Rainforest is another term that gets used frequently. But startups, founders, must be at the center of any entrepreneurial ecosystem. You'll hear the words founder-led, founder-supported. They must be at the center of every ecosystem. If you're doing that, if you're not having their voice or coming from what they're looking for, if that's not the first thing that motivates you, then you're going to get lost, and it's not going to get adopted. So you've got founders, the people with the spirit, the drive, the front of the train that's going to pull the rest of the cars along. And we want to focus on those founders, and the talent should follow them. But then you've also got employees. Somebody needs to believe in that founder. Somebody needs to want to follow them into, the dark night of the soul, and help them when they're beating their head against the wall and trying to find a solution. And those employees, those co-founders, are going to be the next founders, right? So we have to keep that cycle going. But there's also investors. So that's venture capital, that's angel investors, that's friends and family, that's foundations, that's grants. Those are all types of people that fund and are necessary in an ecosystem, because without any of these, the ecosystem falls apart. Incubators and accelerators. I'm not going to go through all of these, but I just want to kind of spit some of these terms out so that you get an understanding of what are the components and why it's important for them all to work in tandem or in collaboration with each other. Otherwise, everybody's kind of playing their own note, but it's not making a song. It's just a bunch of noise. You need a conductor of the orchestra. You need a lifeguard in the pool. You need somebody that's keeping track of all the things that are going on. Everybody can stay in their own lane. Need to. We can't affect individual of these components that they have to succeed and fail on their own. But to work together, that's when the ecosystem is really thriving. I saw something pop in the Q&A. Let me see that. Great. I'll get to that in a second. So yeah, as I'm going off, just fire away questions in there, and we'll either hit them as I go or collect them at the end. But these are all the components of an ecosystem, right? And I'd be interested to know, on the top of your head, is this surprising to you that there would be this many components? Or once you start to peel the onion back, is it make like, okay, this makes sense of how this all interplays? So when Centrifuge was formed, over 7 years ago, all of these components were there. Everything has been, we didn't create this thing called Startup Cincy. We just kind of, put the paddles on the patient as it's sitting there on the operating table and woke it up, and gave it new life, and really gave everybody a sense of belonging. But it wasn't always that way. There were these fractures, there were these islands and some isolation. And, this all started from a conversation with one of our former CEO, a lady by the name of Wendy Lee, who, when she had just started here at Centrifuge, so again, I'll go into Centrifuge just briefly, a startup catalyst organization focusing on helping startups move ahead on the game board, help their business out, get to the next lily pad in their journey. So we had a new member gathering. When we have new members for the month, they would come in and go around the table, and everybody would tell us about their ideas, about how they were going to change the world. And it's really inspirational. So when you get 2 or 3 in, you're like, what's your idea? And they tell you about how they're going to change this whatever food delivery app, and how the social entrepreneurship and the proceeds are going to go to XYZ. It was really kind of it gets you fired up. So at the end of this this around the table, Wendy comes over to me, and she had just been here for a couple months, and says, these guys need T-shirts or something. They need to feel like they belong to a group, because now there's that kindred spirit. Well, at the time, this was our logo. Centrifuge is kind of a goofy name. It was just getting off the ground, and I didn't think that anybody was going to wear a Centrifuge logo. It's doesn't lend itself to any transferring. It's pixelated. It's got that curly Q going. So I knew that, or felt that not everybody would respond to being a part of this odd named organization. And at the time there was, so again, this was about 6 years ago, there was a lot of activity around these different groups that wanted to, were claiming some semblance of their own community, but naming it in a way that had Cincinnati a part of it. So you've got the Digital Rhine, you've got Built in Cincy, Main Street Ventures. These are all place-based things. Queen City Angels, Cincinnati Innovates, Cincy Tech is an organization. So is it the Cincy Tech community? Well, that's a little confusing, but I used Rheingeist as an example that Cincy made was something that was a name that was getting traction, and for this growing community of makers, of entrepreneurs that wanted to label themselves, that they're proud to be part of this little literal geography here of Greater Cincinnati. And Cincy Made is still on all of the Rheingeist cans. So this was all going on, but there was also a hashtag, and this was a guy named Dave Knox, a guy named Pat Longo, and several others kind of brainstormed around, let's put a hashtag together, and came up with Startup Cincy, and started to use it. And this was social media shorthand for everybody to stay in touch with each other. They tag each other in messages and in groups, etc. Somebody created a Facebook group around Startup Cincy. There was a URL, startupcincy.com, that somebody had, and they just bought it but didn't do anything with it. And then somebody a different group owned or had the permissions on the Twitter handle of Startup Cincy, and so these were disparate organizations doing a bunch of different things. But I felt that this was the lowest common denominator, that this was something that everybody could agree upon, that wasn't territorial, in that you weren't just talking about the Brandery's portfolio or people that graduated from Miami University's program. Startup Cincy was something that we could all agree with. So after Wendy kind of gave me that charge of these guys need t-shirts, I reached out to one of the founders of a company called Chore Monster, Chris Bergman, who is now the founder of a gaming studio here called Guiley Games in Cincinnati. It's another trait of entrepreneurs is they're tireless. They're always looking for windmills to tilt after, but what's the next thing that they can get to? And I wanted the design of the t-shirt to come from the street, right? I didn't want it to be just something that was top down, and you'll kind of hear this later, that it's no longer command and control when you talk about complicated and complex systems, of which ecosystems and economic development is built on complex systems. It had to be real. It had to have some authenticity to it. So he introduced me to his co-founder, and who had designed some t-shirts, and had got them on a site called Cotton Bureau. I don't know if anybody's aware of them, but I like Cotton Bureau style. They're kind of interesting graphic tees, but stylistic. So these are just some of the early renderings. I wanted there to be an icon of the city. Wanted it to look good on a t-shirt. These are just grayscale versions, but these are some of the things that we spit out, and eventually we settled on what's in the upper left. That was the first logo. It was grayscale, just something that we could get out there and see if it worked. So we gave them out to our members at the next member meeting. So I did this all in like a month. Made 100 of them, and they were gone quickly. I don't even have one of the originals anymore. When you see those in the wild, Tarek, who I think gave one of your first talks, he has one and he's very proud of it. Like it should be behind glass or something, because those are very rare to see. We eventually morphed into the lower one there of me in the red shirt. At the time, a lot of the startup t-shirts were dark and like black, and that wasn't really what we wanted. We wanted to pop. We wanted it to be seen. Cincinnati is a red town, so I wanted people to wear these at Reds games or UC games, and you can see this from blocks away. So the logo is red, white, and blue, which another, this is that the World Cup was going on at this time. Captain America was a big thing. So, to make it kind of red, white, and blue also made it more universal. But the the next iteration was red. And then eventually we would settle on the blue on the upper right. And I hope I'm not giving anything away, but or spoiling anything. But I think you're all going to get one of these T-shirts. So don't hold me to it. Just tell them that Zan said it. But you know, these are the T-shirts that we've settled on now. Cleaned the logo up a little bit, brought it all inside, got rid of the hashtag, added some waves at the bottom to acknowledge not just the Ohio River, but that this straddles the other side of the river. And then in the lower right is our ghost T-shirt or blackout T-shirt. That was the most popular one, that limited edition that we did. But my point here is that, you know, the brand manifested itself in a T-shirt, but it's not about T-shirts. The T-shirts is just it's just a cover. These are just some of the things that we tossed around when we were coming up with these other designs. But it's not about the T-shirt. It's about building a community. And what we found is that when we put this notice out that we Centrifuge were interested in talking to and in gathering entrepreneurs, overwhelming response. So much so that people didn't realize that there were that many startups and that many people that were interested in startups. Because of that fractalization, they didn't realize that how much was going on in their community. And so my analogy is, it's like building a lighthouse on the shore and waking up the next day and there's 300 ships in your harbor. Like, where did these people come from? All they needed was a beacon, right? All they needed was something, I mean, I'm oversimplifying here, but what that beacon attracted them to like-minded people, and to see, you know, what else is going on in the community. Because maybe they didn't want to go through an accelerator. Maybe they didn't want to take outside investment. Maybe they didn't want to share with their university what their idea was, or they didn't think it was good enough. So where do we talk, and how do I get to this? And who else can I kind of bounce into? But that's really what an ecosystem is and does at its core, is bringing people together. So I want to pause real quickly and ask Zaina if I'm going too fast or too slow, and because I want to save time for I've just got a few more slides to go through, but I just want to make sure that this is a good time to speed it up or slow it down.
Yeah, so we're getting close to 12:30, so within the next 5-10 minutes, if we could get to questions, that would be great. Also, just a reminder for students to keep submitting any questions you have, but Eric, you're doing fine on time. So.
Okay, I'll keep going. So when it came time to, thank you, Zaina, when it came time to, talk about Centrifuge and really who's behind our effort, these are the architects of Centrifuge, and by protracted, they're supporters of Startup Cincy. They're a part of the community. So next week I'll go through the origin story of Centrifuge, but know that it's city leaders and large corporate leaders who knew that growth for their region was not going to come from them alone. It has to come from more than just these big co's. So they commissioned the McKinsey Group to do a study. Again, I'll go over this next week, but these four puzzle pieces are the ecosystem. It's events, it's coordination, it's having a physical hub, it's a roadmap for how to navigate through this ecosystem. That's what Startup Cincy is solving, is that section of this equation. So now, remember, we had a Facebook group, there was a URL, there was a Twitter handle, there was all these different things. And then we came out there and made a logo, right? Which is not a brand. And I think you talked about branding, was it some yesterday or earlier this week with Lee Radford? So a logo is not a brand, but we came out with a logo and came out with this T-shirt. And I started to hand them out like candy and drop them off at demo days and deliver them to people and kind of just mysteriously, they would just show up and people started to wear them, and then other people wanted them and other people wanted to be a part of this. And once they found out that, where the um, where the levers were being pulled and the buttons were being, then it became clear that there is some coordination here. And so the folks that ran the Facebook group said, you know what, you guys should be managing this Facebook group. So bequeath that to Centrifuge. To the Startup Cincy effort. The URL, we bought that off of auction. It was sitting there and just idle, and bought that off of auction. And now startupcincy.com is under that same orbit. And then the final piece, like I said, no one can own a hashtag, but the final piece was the actual Twitter handle. And getting that and grabbing that under this, now all of a sudden, just like Harry Potter, I've got all three of the Deathly Hallows, right? So this was a seminal moment for us to now, as a community, really become a rallying cry to have one unifying message and one, at least we have all of this in common. And now it's a burgeoning community that, and I'll just let this manifesto soak in, because I think it's so powerful stuff of using Startup Cincy as a rallying cry. What it stands for is for people that love the hustle and want to turn their idea into a reality. Startup Cincy is it's a function of a bunch of different factors. It's accelerators, it's big co's, it's funds, it's meetups, it's hubs, it's universities. It's all of that thing, all of those things, under one banner. And spoiler alert is it's working. These are some recent headlines that we've got from very respected organizations, and I've got a report of over 40 different ecosystems and organizations who over the years have come, I call it the doorbell report. They've come ringing our doorbell to ask, how did you do this? How did you guys get this together? How did you coordinate this? And, kind of the secret is it was already there. So I'm very careful to never take credit for creating the community, Startup Cincy. The community creates it. And you do have to have entrepreneurs at the center of what you're doing, of the mission. But entrepreneurs want to entrepreneur. They don't want to build a community. So we can't depend on them to do all of this other coordination stuff. Somebody needs to be the Fitbit for the ecosystem. Somebody needs to say, is all of this working? How does this all play? How many steps are we taking? What's our blood sugar level? What's our, all of that stuff? What's our heart rate at? How much funding do we have? How much funding comes in from the outside? How many minority entrepreneurs do we have? How many female, entrepreneurs got to focus on running their business. So this is just a setup for, how powerful ecosystems are. So I'm going to skip way ahead. So just take a look at this. And this is a map. This is version 1. Version 2 is on the website right now of a resource guide of all of the different organizations that are here in Startup Cincy to serve entrepreneurs. And this takes it from imagining, incubating, all the way down to growth. So it's linear in design, but it doesn't mean like you have to go to Creative Mornings and then you go to Hack Cincy and then you go to Queen City Angels. Like this is the general order. But when we visualized that, at first it was just a listing, a grid, an Excel spreadsheet of everything that was there. But using a tool like this allows us to really assess and where are the overlaps, where are the gaps in the ecosystem. It shouldn't be a head scratcher for us if we're looking at why don't we have any Series D startups? Well, how much growth capital is in the ecosystem? Well, whoops, we only got River City's capital. Okay, what are we doing to address that? Or is that enough? And do we need to get them more people to syndicate and partner with? So this is a tool on ecosystem building. It's kind of an advanced tool. Not everybody has the wherewithal to physically map out their ecosystem. But that is where a plot where Cincinnati really takes it a leap ahead. I'll back up a second. I skipped over this. This is kind of this is the advanced version, if this was a DVD, there'd be a blurb up and you could click that for more information. This Team of Teams book by General McChrystal is is where the where things are headed as far as strategy goes around ecosystem development, that is no longer command and control. You can't just have one person dictating out what everybody else should be doing. It is a team of teams. So just want to tease that for the folks that are interested in ecosystem building, that this would be a book. It's very easy read, and it's fun to look at some of the corollaries there. But let me get to a good landing page here, and let me start to answer some of these questions. Okay. Zand, how can high school and college students get involved in Startup Cincy? If your college is in the ecosystem, we have great relationships with Xavier, UC, Miami, and NKU. And those are just 4 of the universities that are within a stone's throw of the central point of Cincinnati. It doesn't take much more to get to Thomas More, Mount St. Joe, Cincinnati State, Indiana University, Ohio State, Lexington, Louisville. There's a ton right around there. So each of those, of the top 4, the first 4 that I mentioned, have entrepreneurial programs or centers. That would be the first place to start, because those, intentionally, we have relationships with those entrepreneur centers to make sure that we're understanding and they're understanding what else is going on. So the first thing that I would do is, if you are on, from a college standpoint, is get connected to those centers. And if my email is ericw@centrifuge.com. And if you need an introduction to any one of those 4, I would be happy to make sure that you're connected to those. From a high school standpoint, there's a couple programs in place right now. Square One focuses primarily on Northern Kentucky, but Inter Alliance is another one from a high school standpoint. The Inter Alliance more on the tech side of things, but they're a good entry point for entrepreneurial-minded and tech-focused students. If a community has a higher startup density, does that make it more or less difficult to start a business? The first thing that comes to mind is density is what we need. You need to have people who have been there and made those mistakes. You have to see that path. And that's one of the things that candidly is what Cincinnati is waiting for. Waiting for, that's not the right word, but we're looking for that unicorn of high alpha Exact Target in Indianapolis is a good example. They created a venture studio called High Alpha. But that the path of Exact Target, eventually it's a software as a service, plugs into Salesforce. They would eventually sell to Salesforce, but they went public and had an initial public offering. They sold stock, and then Salesforce bought them. So that elevated everybody at the highest levels of the companies are now the new angels in Indianapolis. The people that were middle managers that were behind them now say, hey, I like how those folks got, I see the path here. So now they've moved up to start the next round of startups that are getting funded by the people who had the success. So there's a cycle. So we do need that density. Success can't be just a one-off. So density is important. There was a time when we had a pretty good pulse on how many startups were in here. And I used to say, like, if there are 300 startups, if we can tab and name 300 startups, we need a 1 in front of that number. Whatever it is, we need 1,000 more. We need those people that are trying things out, are taking the swings, taking the at-bats, because that's what it takes, is a lot of different tries and a lot of different iterations. And so startup density is important. But you can't just have a bunch of entrepreneurs, right? So density, don't get fooled too much by density. I want to be careful there in saying that at the end of the day, it is about jobs. It is about high paying jobs, maybe not the quantity of jobs, maybe the quality of jobs, but we got to differentiate. And that's why I wanted to start off with what types of entrepreneurs there are. That there are 4 different types, and they're all necessary. And tech-enabled startups are just one sliver of that whole pie. So we need the mom and pops. we need the solopreneurs, but we also need Navistone. We also need those companies that are growing. They're going to employ a lot of people. That's the bet that the communities are making to get themselves bigger. So density is important, but density isn't everything. I just want to hammer that home a little bit. Look at that. And Zaina, while I'm combing through this, if you want to, like, anything that I'm not getting to that you think deserves a shout out, I would appreciate any help.
Okay, sounds good.
Let's talk about the pitch competition here. It says, how do we kind of plan out or depend on the ecosystem around us in order to foster and support our business model? That's a great question. And you look at things that the ecosystem can be good at, or that the ecosystem can help foster and help you along. So I would say that you should be looking at it in terms of where you're going to have the greatest success. So, from the bulk of resources that are here in Cincinnati, and one of the founding tenets of the Brandery and why the Brandery was formed was it's going to take Cincinnati's assets and apply that to startups. So what are Cincinnati's assets? There are a lot of design agencies. There are a lot of CPG firms, consumer packaged goods. There's a lot of retail exposure and a lot of retail help. So what if we take these digitally native brands that want to sell something, want to sell a physical thing, and what if we apply the knowledge that's here in the ecosystem to help them move forward? So that would be the biggest thing that I would say, how the ecosystem can help. And why ecosystems gravitate certain types of talent, why the Research Triangle in North Carolina, attracts so much high-tech talent. Why is Dayton focused on aerospace? They've got the Wright-Patterson Air Force Lab, and a lot of that research that goes around this. So there's a lot of smart people kind of hanging around the hoop to help them out. So, when you talk about your pitch competitions, it's looking at how can I leverage that which Cincinnati is good at to help me, and looking at the ecosystem, where are those components that I can hammer home a little bit more. Dana, what do you think? Any other stuff that you are reading through and think I should call out?
Yeah, I like this question. Would you say Cincinnati's entrepreneurs' first step in starting a business should be connecting with Centrifuge, and just kind of where Centrifuge lines up in that process and where they can help?
Yeah, so from a Centrifuge standpoint, there's a bunch of different facets of the Centrifuge business model. We operate a fund, we run a co-working space, we provide services to entrepreneurs. But from specifically on that entrepreneur standpoint, our job is to move you to the next lily pad, right? Get you just moving forward. And if that's introducing you to the folks at QCA, or getting, you could be in the Cincy Tech portfolio, but need attention to other investors that we have through our fund. Let's try to help bridge that. So Centrifuge at one level is an air traffic controller, trying to deflect and put you into the right direction that you need to head, and really just make sure that for those really high potential, high growth startups, that the right organizations are aware of your progress. And by organizations, I mean, if this is something that Kroger needs to know and invest in, and it's in their backyard, then we want to be a snowplow, right? And just get things out of the way to make sure that moves forward. But if you're at the very starting end, we want to make sure that you're plugged in with morning mentoring, which is a program that HCDC, the Hamilton County Development Center, and Queen City Angels runs for new startups. and gives them some advice on, where they should go to. So Centrifuge, what I'm trying to get across is not a one-stop shop. We can be a one-stop shop that pushes you into other directions and can supply some help along the way, but it's not intended to be the only place that you go to in the ecosystem. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, that was great. There's kind of another question that kind of goes off that, but a student's asking, what kind of careers do Centrifuge and Startup Cincy offer, and how could a student become involved before then?
Yeah, so that's a great question, and that's part of the impetus behind teaching this class at Miami University. Is it's a career path. This is my job. So there are other jobs, there are other ecosystems. For every Boston and Houston, there's Cedar Rapids, there's Bismarck, there's New Orleans. There are these other cities that need to focus on their entrepreneur community. And there are funders, there are accelerators, there are co-working spaces. So ecosystem building is kind of an attitude and a way to make sense of all of the noise that's going on. So looking for ways to help in the post-COVID era and current COVID era, events were always a big part. Events can be capital E or lowercase e events. They can be big things, or they could be like casual meetups at Thursday happy hour. That's a challenge now, because ecosystem builders depend on events. That's where the collisions happen. That's where you meet people. And now we're going to have to do that we are doing that all online, which is, there's some fatigue there for sure. So that's a challenge, but you don't have to work at Centrifuge to be an ecosystem builder. Not every community has an organization like Centrifuge. That's why it was important to list those things out. Like an ecosystem builder can come from any one of those organizations. But my dream, my vision is to create this as a career path, and to eventually get some sort of certification, or some sort of, imagine if you could minor or major in ecosystem building, and then you go walking into M25 which is a venture firm in Chicago, and for a entry level or junior analyst position, and they say, well, you're great, but I need to tell you what an accelerator is. He was like, no, actually I studied this in college. I've got a certification in ecosystem building. So I know how all of this stuff flows in. Like, wow, you got the job, now go to work. You understand the framework of how it all kind of puts together. That's the dream.
There is one more interesting question that I see. I think this might be our last one if we don't.
Yeah, I could talk for the rest of the afternoon. So you really do need to shut me off.
Here's our next one. Should startups want to continually grow and help / grow the ecosystems of other communities, or should there be a more focused view of one community?
An
interesting question.
Yeah. No, I think that what I've seen is that the community evolves with the needs of the most successful. It should evolve with the needs of the most successful startups. If it doesn't evolve and doesn't find talent, then that startup is going to need to leave. So the startup needs to be concerned with, where is it getting its talent from? And that's just one example. Real estate. If you this is a real thing that's happening in San Francisco right now, is that it's very expensive to run a business there. The talent is expensive, the space is expensive, and now with this virtualization and remote working, et cetera, how is that going to work? So these are all considerations that, again, being founder focused, if you're not dialed into how are things going, Rod Robinson, who's the CEO of a company called Connexus, which was recently purchased by a bigger company called Cupa. If we're not get an ear to him of what do you need to help grow, then we as an ecosystem are in trouble. So it's not that ecosystem hopping, you don't want to have that. Changing ecosystems is as difficult as changing banks. Nobody does it. It's really tough to do. The bank that you're with now is most likely going to be the bank that you're with 30 years from now. Again, spoiler alert, but it's tough to change banks. It's also tough to change ecosystems. But at the earliest stages, and especially now that the world is flattening, it might be a little bit easier. So, focusing on what your gazelles, that's another term. So unicorn is a company that has $1 billion valuation. Always usually tech or tech enabled. There are some physical product that they're unicorns, but for the most part, they're tech or tech enabled, software driven startups that are $1 billion. Gazelles are like the fast ones that are going to be the next unicorn. So you want to look at those gazelles and you want to be able to put your arms around them and say, don't leave. What do you need? How can we remove some of these obstacles? And oh, by the way, who else should we be looking at? Because those, the next ones up are talking to the ones that are on the rise, and you as an ecosystem builder need to facilitate those conversations and make sure that everything is going on, and make sure that we're keeping the grass watered and the trees pruned, and minding the overlaps and minding the gaps, and trying to kind of tend to that rainforest as it were.
Eric, we actually have one more question, and I think it's a great question to end on because it's very forward-looking. But the question is, what do you hope to see in 10 years as the startup ecosystem in Cincinnati continues to grow? What are you most looking forward to for Cincinnati's future as a hub for startups?
Great question. 10 years, that's a long time, but that is the viewpoint that you need for any type of economic development. These are long games. These are long play games. The saying is, when's the best time to plant a tree? 20 years ago. When's the second best time, though, is today. So, a lot of the things that we're doing now, we want to see bear fruit down the line. So in 10 years from now, I would like there to be that people see the path of being an entrepreneur is a viable career option, frankly, that you don't have to, success is not determined by being a brand manager at Procter & Gamble. I mean, no offense by that, none at all, but that's sometimes that's where we get clouded into what success looks like. But just because that's what we have here in Cincinnati, where in some ecosystems that's not the case. It's kind of like saying, our best male athletes in America play football or basketball, but the best male athletes in Portugal play soccer. Boulder has a different view on perspective on successful business people, and it's not working at a big co, right? It's what have you founded, and how many companies have you started, and how successful are they? So that's what I'd like to have that, and we're getting there of teaching and showing and demonstrating that being an entrepreneur and working for an entrepreneur is a viable career option. So that's one thing I'm looking forward to. And then from a hub standpoint, I think that, the universities, there are all successful ecosystems have successful research institutions at their core. That is a truism. Boulder has the University of Colorado, Silicon Valley has Stanford, and et cetera, et cetera. The research institutions are, which is code for universities, just on a higher order. They're always a part of it, and to get that sort of collaboration that the ecosystem wants to embrace, the innovation that's coming out of universities, and it's underway right now here at the Cincinnati Innovation District, right up the hill in Clifton from University of Cincinnati. So I think that will be, within 10 years, that'll be humming too, and hopefully people won't be embarrassed to or afraid to talk about being an entrepreneur.
Okay, we're coming up close on time here, so I'm gonna close us out. Thank you everyone for taking the time to join us today. Thank you, Eric, for sharing your insights on Cincinnati's startup ecosystem with us today. Again, the recorded version of this webinar will be available in the next few days. Students, we love to hear your feedback. Again, please fill out that survey that pops up once you leave the meeting. It only takes a minute. Tune back in on Monday for 2 events. There's a pitch competition training, again with Professor Mike Halloran at 10:30. And Tarek will be joining us again for his webinar, Change the World, What's Truly Possible When You Think Like a Startup at 12. And then part 2 of Eric's series will also be Tuesday at 12. Anyways, have a great rest of your day, everyone. I'll see you
Thanks,
guys soon.
everyone.